The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over the 6 different chlorine types for you. Actually, there's only going to be 4 that I'm going to touch on in depth here, because 2 of them we don't really use in my region, and we probably don't use them in many regions, or you probably don't use them in many regions of the country anyway. So I'm going to focus on 4 of the 6 here in this podcast, so you have a better idea of what kind of chlorine you want to use in your pool for the season, and the differences between each of the different chlorine types. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Also receive priority service, enhanced rebate programs, a discount on your general liability insurance through SPA, a discount on your pool routing software through Skimmer, and an opportunity to co-brand with Leslie's on your social media, website, truck, and more. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. One thing I'm probably not going to do is get really technical here and give you a lot of technical information, because I want this to be very understandable. Now, if you want some more technical details about each chlorine type, I did record a podcast with the late Bob Lowry, and we really went into the weeds of each chlorine type for you in really deep detail. But this is not what this one's really about. If you really want to learn more about each chlorine type in minutia, you can pull up that podcast. You can just go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, and on the banner, click on the podcast icon. In the search box, just type in Bob Lowry, and you're going to see the chlorine type podcast we recorded there, where we talk about more, in depth about each one. But for the regular layman, or just the do-it-yourself pool owner, or the pool pro, you don't need to know all those details. And I'll start with gas chlorine. And gas chlorine used to be popular when I first started in the 90s. You would see the trucks, and they would have a big cylinder on the back. They would just wheel it back to the pool and inject the gas directly into the water. Highly effective. However, I think California, I don't think it's banned per se, but I don't think you can find a gas chlorine delivery company anymore. Maybe because of the regulations. And I guess it is dangerous in some way, but it wasn't really hazardous. But of course, everything back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have seatbelt laws. You could smoke indoors. I remember when I was a kid going to restaurants, and there was smoking and non-smoking sections, and you could smell the smoke in the whole restaurant anyway. But that goes to say that back then, I don't think that we were paying a lot of attention to safety. So nowadays, with all the, enhanced safety regulations, the gas chlorine is a thing of the past, even though it was highly effective. But you may see gas chlorine still in other regions of the countries, and that's something that's just not very prevalent. The other chlorine type that you don't see very prevalent out there, in at least my area, and maybe in most areas of the country, is lithium hypochlorite. And this is a chlorine, but when you Google search it, you're going to get a lot of search results for the non-chlorine shock, the potassium monosulfate, and this is sold at Leslie's as fresh and clear. And this is not lithium hypochlorite. The non-chlorine shock that you see out there is technically a non-chlorine shock. It's not chlorine. It is used mainly in cases of combined chlorine to break that combined chlorine. Also, it's used before a pool party to prevent the combined chlorine. So it's not technically a chlorine. You can put it in and it has no effect on you. You can swim right away. And it doesn't, sanitize the pool as chlorine would sanitize the pool. And that's the non-chlorine shock. So it's not a chlorine per se, but lithium hypochlorite is a chlorine type that's not really prevalent. I think Cal-Hypo has surpassed that and taken over the market in that case. So you can't find it readily available, so we're not going to talk too much about it. But since I brought up the non-chlorine shock, a lot of people are gravitating towards that because of the price point, and it's almost as expensive, or as affordable, I should say, or priced accordingly with chlorine now. So you can use that if you have a problem with combined chlorine. The easiest way to know if your pool has combined chlorine is to test for it, of course. You can smell it also. If you ever have been at a hotel and you smell like this ammonia kind of smell, that's the combined chlorine. The chloramines in the water. We can test for it with a photometer like the Color Q 2X Pro 7 or 2X Pro 9. You can also test with it with a reagent test kit, and test strips will also show you the combined chlorine in some cases. So definitely it's something to test for and to treat, of course, because it makes the chlorine ineffective at a certain level, and the non-chlorine shock can help with that. So with that out of the way, let's focus on the 4 main types of chlorine that you can use in your swimming pool and that are readily available out there. And the first is liquid chlorine. This is probably the most neutral, I should say. I don't know if that's the right word. I guess they're like the Sweden of chlorine. They don't do a lot to the pool except add the sanitizer. Now they will add salt to the pool because that's one of the main byproducts of liquid chlorine. We're going to need to add a lot of liquid chlorine with really not adding any fresh water or having any kind of rain to dilute the pool to bring the TDS or total dissolved solids up to a level where using liquid chlorine is a problem. So it's not something that you need to really worry about, but it is something that you need to know about, that one of the byproducts, and all of the chlorine types I'm going to mention here have a byproduct that they add to the water. I would say maybe, I guess, gas chlorine, going back to that, was probably the one that didn't have a lot of these byproducts, but it's not available. So the liquid chlorine will add salt to the water. That's not a big deal in most cases, because when I go over what the other ones add to the water, that may be more of a problem than adding salt to the water. Now, liquid chlorine is not measured the same way as far as the active chlorine as a dry powder form or a tablet form of chlorine. So therefore, it's hard to kind of correlate in your head that this 1 gallon of liquid chlorine, and in the industry we use about 12.5% active chlorine in our liquid chlorine. You can buy it at the store. It may be weaker. You know, if you just use straight Clorox bleach, then it's about half of the active chlorine as the liquid chlorine you would buy at a local pool store or, from your supplier. So you can use, the Clorox bleach in the pool as long as it's unscented, doesn't have any additives to it. You just realize that it's about half as strong as liquid chlorine from a pool store usually. Now, Home Depot may sell like a liquid chlorine at 10%. Those are kind of important numbers, the percentage, because that means that actually indicates how strong that liquid chlorine is compared to another chlorine type. So for just the sake of making things simple, 12.5% active chlorine in 1 gallon of liquid chlorine is about equal to 1 pound of the Cal-Hypo if you were going to go, comparing one chlorine type to the other. And this is also important when you're talking about a saltwater generator. The manufacturers will say that, this particular salt system will make 1 pound of chlorine in 24 hours, based on whatever the output of the generator and the specs of it. They're all rated for different amounts of pounds of chlorine. And so the easy way for me to distinguish how much chlorine the saltwater generator is putting in the pool is to pretty much say that 1 pound of chlorine produced by the saltwater generator is equal to 1 gallon of liquid chlorine at 12.5%. Not an exact comparison, mind you, but in all intents and purposes, is an easy way to correlate, say, a 1 pound bag of Cal-Hypo or 1 pound generated by the chlorine generator. So liquid chlorine is again measured differently because it's a liquid and doesn't correlate exactly. And I'm really on this point for a long time because I just want to make it clear that if you go to the pool store and they say, well, liquid is not as strong as this particular chlorine type, that is not the truth, because the liquid chlorine is just as strong. It just doesn't have the same measurements. So you'll see the 12.5%, and then you'll see like a bag of Cal-Hypo that says, 67% or 71%. And you're going to think in your head mathematically that has more chlorine in it, it's stronger. Therefore, I'm going to buy the Cal-Hypo over the liquid, but that's not the case. Some of the pros of liquid chlorine is that it's very fast acting. So you pour it directly in the pool, and it acts right away and does right away what it wants to do. I mean, if you had a green pool and you just poured in, 12 or 14 gallons of liquid chlorine, you will see almost instantly the water lightening and turning to like a murky bluish green color because the chlorine activates and works really effectively and quickly. It will not raise the cyanuric acid level in your pool, which is extremely important because two of the other three chlorine types that I'm going to mention here do raise the cyanuric acid in the pool significantly. So the fact that liquid chlorine does not add cyanuric acid to the pool is definitely a plus. And I'll go into more detail about that with the other types that do add cyanuric acid. It's also safe for all pool types. Some people say you can't pour it directly into a vinyl liner pool. I say from experience that I disagree with that. You can pour it directly into a vinyl liner pool and it's not going to have any effect on the liner itself. I've done it for years with no problem. Same with a fiberglass pool. And liquid chlorine is very easy to use, easy to measure. You can go to use the poolcalculator.com and that'll give you the dosage of the liquid chlorine for the pool. There are some cons of liquid chlorine, and some of the cons are the fact that you do need cyanuric acid in the pool for the liquid chlorine to be effective because, again, there's no cyanuric acid in the product. And so you want to have the acceptable levels of cyanuric acid in the pool, which is 30 to 50 parts per million is the standard. So you need to add cyanuric acid to the pool to make the chlorine effective. Another thing is that the shelf life, or the half-life, I should say, of liquid chlorine is about 3 months. So after 3 months or so, if you have 12.5% active chlorine, you're going to be down to 6%. But that half-life doesn't keep going down and degrade to zero that quickly. So it'll reach the half-life point quicker than any other chlorine type. And, it'll lose its effectiveness, but not entirely over that 3-month period. So you want to make sure that the liquid chlorine is fresh. If you ever have left a gallon of Clorox bleach in your laundry room for 6 months, let's say, you notice that it's a lot weaker and you maybe not even going to be able to see a difference when you put it into the washing machine because that has degraded from 6% to 3%. So that does happen with liquid chlorine. So you have to rotate the stock and make sure you're getting fresh liquid chlorine when you buy it at your pool store or your hardware store. As far as the price point of liquid chlorine, it kind of varies by state. In Florida, it's really inexpensive. There are several chlorine producers in Florida, so I've heard prices as low as 90 cents to $1.20 per gallon. Here in California, we're not as lucky, so we're paying close to $5 per gallon. And it's one of those things where, the cost of chlorine, of course, has gone up just about for every type. So I wouldn't say the price point of liquid chlorine is any better or any worse than the other types of chlorine. So there's really no money-saving aspect of liquid chlorine any longer. There was in the past in California, but those days are gone. So if you're looking at just straight comparing, one cost of chlorine to the other, there's not a lot of savings anymore for any of the chlorine types, basically, which is kind of weird because liquid used to be the cheapest form, and then you would have Tri-Chlor next, and then Cal-Hypo, and then Dichlor. But with all the increases, I think they're all pretty equal as far as per pound or per ounce of chlorine. You're going to pay similar in price. There are differences still, but the money saving of liquid chlorine is no longer applicable on the West Coast. So that's liquid chlorine. I like it, and I think it's a great sanitizer choice with those drawbacks. And since it doesn't have any cyanuric acid, and I mentioned you have to add it to the pool, the actual amount you have to put in the pool, let's say you have I'll just throw this in there real quick. If you had a 15,000 gallon pool and your chlorine level was at 1 part per million, then you added a whole gallon into that pool and brought it up to 6 parts per million. You would think that would last the whole week because you just added 1 gallon of liquid chlorine, but that's not the case because it degrades in the pool at about 1 part per million per day. So by the end of the week, you're going to have to add, or before the end of the week, I should say, you're going to have to add more liquid chlorine to that pool if you're not using any other kind of chlorine in that pool, like a tablet, Tri-Chlor tablet, or any other kind of chlorine product, or a Cal-Hypo tablet. So therefore, it's not going to last the whole week. In most cases, by just pouring a gallon in on, say, a Monday, that following Monday, depending on, of course, usage, water temperature, all these factors, and I'm talking more summertime temperature-wise than in the winter, that chlorine is not going to last, or that liquid chlorine you added is not going to last the entire week. The next chlorine type that you may want to consider to use as your primary sanitizer is calcium hypochlorite, which is known as Cal-Hypo in the industry. And this comes in two forms, basically. You have the powdered form. It's kind of a powder, maybe a little more granular, I guess, if you look at it carefully. And then you have the tablet form. And the tablet form has been around for a long time, but the price point of the Cal-Hypo tablets has been usually priced out of reach of most consumers. However, with the Tri-Chlor tablets rising in price dramatically, the Cal-Hypo tablet may be something you can look at. And Cal-Hypo has similar benefits to liquid chlorine in that you're not adding any cyanuric acid to the water when you're adding the Cal-Hypo. And if you remember, I mentioned that every chlorine type has a byproduct that goes into the pool. Well, Cal-Hypo, the byproduct is calcium. So if you're in an area where calcium is an issue and adding a lot of calcium to the pool would be a problem, again, you'd have to add a lot of Cal-Hypo for this to have an effect. However, you have to know that it does add calcium to the water and it'll increase the calcium hardness of the water over time. And that's also with the factors of adding fresh water and dilution by rainwater. But just in most respects, calcium is going to be increased in the pool using Cal-Hypo. So if you're using Cal-Hypo granular to sanitize the pool, and you're also using Cal-Hypo tablets in a dispenser or skimmer, then therefore the calcium level is going to be going up twofold. And that's why the Cal-Hypo tablet manufacturer recommends shocking your pool with liquid chlorine and not Cal-Hypo to eliminate the kind of 1-2 punch of Cal-Hypo increasing the calcium with both products adding calcium to the water. So that's probably a drawback in some areas, but in most areas the calcium hardness isn't a major issue. And if you're using the LSI, you can decide if Cal-Hypo is right for your area or not. There is really zero money saving benefits for using Cal-Hypo now. The price has gone up dramatically. I would say it's gone up 100% since 2 years ago. So you're not going to save any money with Cal-Hypo over liquid. The Cal-Hypo tablets, I mentioned that they were at a high price point before all of the inflation. And now with the inflation, they're kind of equal to the Tri-Chlor tablets. And again, I think I mentioned that the Cal-Hypo tablets don't have any stabilizer in them also. So they look a lot like Tri-Chlor tablets. Maybe they're shaped differently. I would highly recommend the Segura brand, which now is Salinas. They've been, I guess, merged with this company. I wouldn't say they were bought out. So Segura tablets, they sell them under the CCH brand. These are really great Cal-Hypo tablets because they dissolve over a 7-day period. And again, they don't add cyanuric acid to the pool water. And the price point may be very similar to Tri-Chlor in your region. And I didn't go into a lot of detail with the liquid chlorine about it raising the pH in the pool because there's new thought that it doesn't really raise the pH. However, the Cal-Hypo will give the pH a slight raise of, not dramatically, but it will raise the pH when you add it. And it could cloud the pool water if you pour it directly in. It's not really, I would say, safe for every surface type for that reason. So you want to be careful you don't pour it directly into a vinyl pool just for the fact that maybe the bag is not, or the powder is not going to dissolve right away and it may stain a liner. But for other pool surface types, it's perfectly safe to pour it directly in. You can introduce it into the skimmer of the pool since it has a high pH. As long as you have the pool running for 6 to 8 hours, that will go right through the system and not damage anything. You can also put it in a bucket of water and kind of dilute it and then pour it around the perimeter of the pool. So it's not as easy to use as liquid chlorine or pouring it directly in, but it's not a major drawback, and it does have a much longer shelf life, I should say this, than liquid chlorine. So Cal-Hypo will last about 2 or 3 years sitting on the shelf. And just like liquid chlorine, you're going to need to add cyanuric acid to the pool, the 30 to 50 parts per million, to protect it from the sun's UV rays. So it's also a great chemical to use as your primary sanitizer. The next type that I'm going to discuss here is Tri-Chlor, and you're probably really familiar with the Tri-Chlor tablets. And I don't have to tell you that the price has gone up 100% for Tri-Chlor, so it's no longer something that's affordable. Most of the Tri-Chlor you're going to see out there is marked 95 or 99% active chlorine. That's kind of a misnomer because about half of the weight, or sometimes more than half of the weight, is cyanuric acid. So if each tablet weighs 8 ounces, 4 ounces of that is cyanuric acid. So, here's where this is the problem, because if you added a 50-pound bucket of tablets to your pool over one season, you've effectively added 25 pounds of cyanuric acid to the water, which raises it well over 150 parts per million in most pools, which has a lot of different effects on the water quality. This can be countered by, of course, using less tablets, supplementing your chlorine usage with liquid chlorine or Cal-Hypo, but in all reality, you're adding a lot of cyanuric acid to the pool using the tablets, so overusing them makes the water harder to balance. Now, I'm going to refer back to Bob Lowry's free chlorine versus cyanuric acid. Just make it a little technical for you, but it shouldn't be extremely technical. For the free chlorine to be effective in the pool, it has to be 7.5% of the cyanuric acid level. And if you have borates in the water, you're looking at 5%. If you're using phosphate and enzymes, you're looking at 5% also as the effective ratio of free chlorine to cyanuric acid. So let's say you don't have any borates in the pool, you're just, it's just a regular pool, and you have 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water. Therefore, with that ratio that Bob Lowry has come up with, which is extremely accurate in testing out there, if you have 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the pool, you're going to need to maintain 7.5 parts per million of free chlorine in that pool every week to prevent algae to be effective against bacteria and viruses. That's a lot of chlorine you're going to be adding to the pool. And so any kind of savings you have on using Tri-Chlor tablets, of course that's gone because of the inflation, but any kind of savings you think you have on using tablets over liquid or Cal-Hypo, it's pretty much erased by the amount you're going to have in the pool continuously to make it effective. So that's why it's kind of like a vicious cycle. You're adding more and more tablets to keep the free chlorine level higher. You're adding more liquid chlorine or Cal-Hypo to keep that free chlorine level higher. And you're also having a lot of water quality issues because of the high chlorine in the pool and the high cyanuric acid. So there are a few ways to counter this. Again, I mentioned using less tablets and also doing a partial drain at the end of the season. If you get an area where you get like 30 inches of rain, this may not be a huge problem for you, but in most other regions like California where we barely get 4 inches of rain, this is a pretty big problem. So Tri-Chlor comes in mainly that one form, the tablet. You can also buy Tri-Chlor as a shock. It's like a powder form, not granular. That can be broadcast directly into the pool. And then you have Tri-Chlor granular, which, one popular product is the Hasa Algaban. And this is a granular Tri-Chlor. You can't use this on a lot of pool surfaces because it will stain it. So use that with caution. And I probably have some podcast on the granular Tri-Chlor. I know I have a video on it for black algae treatment, but use the granular Tri-Chlor with caution. The last chlorine type that I'll touch on is one that most pool pros don't use often because of the price point. It's more expensive than Cal-Hypo liquid, and in all intents and purposes is more expensive than Tri-Chlor in most cases, and this is Dichlor. Now Dichlor is very similar to Tri-Chlor in the fact that it has cyanuric acid in it. It even has more cyanuric acid than Tri-Chlor. It has about 60% or 63% cyanuric acid versus chlorine per pound. So if you have, 1 pound, 16 ounces of Dichlor, about, 9 or 10 ounces is cyanuric acid. So one thing that I do use Dichlor for, which is something that you may consider, since it's quick dissolving, it's also pH neutral, is if you have a new pool startup and you wanted to add cyanuric acid, or let's say you had a pool on liquid chlorine and you want to add cyanuric acid to it. Well, if Dichlor is 60% cyanuric acid and doesn't stain the pool surface and is pH neutral, this is actually a great way to add chlorine as well as cyanuric acid to a pool without any issues. So a lot of times the granular cyanuric acid in a new pool is a no-go because it could stain the surface or it could take forever to dissolve. The liquid pool conditioner is a great product, but the price point is expensive. So if you're going to add chlorine and cyanuric acid together, I think Dichlor would be a great choice for you. As a primary sanitizer, I don't recommend it because of the high level of cyanuric acid in Dichlor. You can use it if you need to add cyanuric acid to a pool and chlorine together, but using it every week in the pool, again, if this is your primary sanitizer and you add 50 pounds of it over the course of the season, you're adding a tremendous amount of cyanuric acid, which is, 50 pounds. You're adding about 30 pounds of cyanuric acid to that pool. So it'll have a tremendous impact on the water quality, as I described with the Tri-Chlor and the effect on the cyanuric acid, the free chlorine. The Dichlor will have the same effect. You're not going to see it heavily used out there. I do like it. It's a good chemical to have on your truck for maybe like a spare chemical to have out there, because it does have a long shelf life also of 2 to 3 years. And I would go back a little bit and say Tri-Chlor has a very long shelf life also. Maybe the same 2 or 3 years applies for Tri-Chlor, but maybe longer. And I think those are one of the benefits of the Cal-Hypo, the Tri-Chlor, and the Dichlor. It's their long shelf life versus liquid chlorine. However, the byproduct of Tri-Chlor and Dichlor that's added to the pool is cyanuric acid. So each chlorine type has their byproduct. And again, liquid chlorine has the least effect on the water. It's adding salt. Cal-Hypo has probably the second least effect, adding calcium. And then Dichlor and Tri-Chlor add cyanuric acid to the pool, conditioner, stabilizer, however you want to call it. I would say, bottom line, pick a chlorine type that you're familiar with, get really educated on it, and you can use it as your primary sanitizer. I would stay away from using Tri-Chlor and Dichlor as your primary sanitizer, and I would lean more towards liquid chlorine and Cal-Hypo, or Cal-Hypo tablets and powder as your primary sanitizer going forward. With liquid chlorine, you can get a liquid feeder. HASA has a liquid feeder available, and you can also find different unique ways to add the liquid chlorine into your pool, maybe with a pump, hydrostolic pump or something. You can use that also to add the liquid chlorine so that it lasts the whole week. So each chlorine type has their pros and cons, of course. And again, I think you should be very familiar with the chlorine type you're putting in your pool for the best results, and to make your pool, of course, to have the best water quality, you have to pick the right sanitizer for your pool. If you're looking for other podcasts that I recorded, I mentioned at the beginning on the banner of the website, swimmingpoollearning.com, there's a podcast icon. Click on that. That'll take you to a drop-down list of other podcasts I recorded, and you can listen to those at your leisure. If you're interested in enhancing your business, I have a coaching program available. You can learn more on my website, or you can go to poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.